¿Qué tal amigos? Tengan ustedes muy buenas noches. Estamos aquí con nuestro amigo Rock. Son aproximadamente las 9 de la noche. Él nos va a contar una experiencia real de contacto que vivió en Australia. Rod, tell me your experience, please.
Okay, I think it was around 2017, and we were in the middle of Australia. There is a big rock, they call it Alice's Rock or Uluru, and there was four of us, Mark, Liz, three of us actually, four of us, Mark, Liz, myself, and Lauren. And
Four people.
four people,
Yes.
and Lauren was a experiencer we had met in Australia. And Mark and Liz had been filming for the documentary during the day. They were tired and they just stayed at the resort. The resort is in the middle of nowhere. There's hundreds of miles to the next town, so it's just desert with a few small bushes everywhere. And I decided to take the equipment out with Lauren. We had everything set up and we were off the highway. We were in a location maybe, I don't know, 200 or 300 feet from the highway, but the car was hidden by the small bushes, you could not see our car from the highway. So we felt that we wanted to be safe and not to be seen from anyone coming down the highway. And we were far enough away from the highway that the lights of their car would not shine on us in any way. So about 1 o'clock in the morning, we saw over on the highway the light of a car slowing down. And there was only a handful of cars the entire night on this lonely highway that was going across Australia. And we thought, what's happening? He's slowing down. And he turned in and came across the desert, through the hard packed gravel right to where we were. And we thought, that's very strange. We're in the middle of nowhere and there's hundreds of miles to the next town. How could he possibly come off the highway to exactly where we were? So I saw him in his car. He was about 30 feet away, maybe 10 meters, and he was, the light inside was going on and he seemed to be doing something. And I told Lauren, I'm going to go talk to him. And he got out of his vehicle, and he was a classic Nordic looking guy, like somebody from Northern Europe, tall and handsome and light colored hair. And I asked him, I said, why did you choose to come into this location? And he says, I want a skywatch. And I thought, skywatch all by himself? And I said, well, where are you coming from? And he said, well, I've been on the highway for something like 16 hours after work, and I'm driving home, and I have another 16 hours to go for the weekend. And like, who drives 32 hours just for the weekend? And everything he said did not make sense. Everything he said was not normal. And I looked at his clothes. He said he worked in the mines in the north part of Australia. And yet I looked at him, and his clothes looked like they just came from the store, or they were just pressed, clean and pressed with an iron. And I thought, for somebody who's been working all day and traveling so many hours, how could his clothes look so fresh and pressed? And nothing about anything he said made sense. Now, Lauren was a little bit nervous, and I felt that he was reading our minds, because everything he said seemed to be reflecting on what we were thinking, seemed to be similar. And Lauren was nervous, and all of a sudden he said, well, if you'd rather I skywatch somewhere else, I can do that. And I was about to say, no, you can stay with us. I was starting to sense that maybe he was an ET guy, an ET being. And when he said, well, maybe I could go somewhere else, Lauren said, well, that would be very kind of you. And then he left. And I said to Lauren, Lauren, I think this guy is an ET. Think about it. Nothing he said made sense. He's traveling like 32 hours to go home for the weekend. and then he's going to go back to work on Monday. And even when I talked to him about things about Australia, I seemed to know more than he did. So there was just nothing about that that made sense. And then later on in the morning, maybe about 5, when the light was starting to come up, we put all the equipment away and we drove down the highway. And as we were about to turn into the resort, waiting for this vehicle to go by, Lauren says to me, "Rob, that's the guy from last night. He just went by us." And I says, "No way." And she said, "Yes." And I immediately turned the car around to follow him to see where he was going, because now he's going back to where we were. And he should have been, 4 or 5 hours down the road the other way, because it was like 1 o'clock in the morning. And this is like 5:30 now. So as soon as I turned the car around, there was no car in sight. And I could see down the highway for, 5 or 10 miles. It was a straight highway with just nothing. So we drove all the way back to where we were set up for sky watching, and we drove at a high rate of speed, and we never saw another car. So that was the first confirmation that maybe this was an ET, because where did the car go? There was no other spots for him to turn off immediately when I turned the car around. So the next thing that happened was maybe a year later, I was in a Facebook group on other things, and we were interviewing a guy, nothing to do with UFOs, and he stopped and he told me he was a very psychic guy. And he said, "Rob, I'm getting a psychic flash." And I said, "What do you mean psychic flash?" And he says, "Well, I'm very, very sensitive to all these things, and I'm seeing you. There's three of you, and one's a woman and one's an ET, and you're in Australia." And I said, "Well, yes, that's correct." And so psychically, he was picking up that we were with an ET. And so that was the two confirmations that we received. One, there was no car when we tried to turn around, and a year later, when this guy out of nowhere just tells me that I was with an ET and another woman, another human being, in Australia, and one was an ET. So, was this guy an ET? Well, I would say 99.9%. Can I be 100% sure? No. But, with those two confirmations I received, I'm almost 100% certain that he was an ET.
Okay, thank you, Rock.
Con mucho gusto. You're welcome.